Hello, everyone, and welcome to the seventh episode of our Findhorn Barrow. Today, me and Alex are joined by Karl Jay-Lewin, who's the founder of Dance North and also the artistic director. And thanks for joining us today, Karl, because I know you've been feeling poorly lately.
Yeah, I have. But I'm here, or you're here actually, because you're in my house, which is fantastic.
In your house that's made of compacted straw bale, is that correct?
It's made of straw bale and then lime render on the outside, and then clay on the inside. On the external walls, the internal walls are a standard plasterboard finish. Yeah,
It's a really interesting house because it looks somehow on the inside like it's a restored old cottage. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. It's got this mix of traditional cottage and contemporary feel. Designed by architect Nicole Edmonds, who lives in the Findhorn village.
If I'm right, Karl, you're from London originally.
No, no, true? No, it's not. I'm from the northwest of England, from a town called St Anne's on Sea, near Blackpool, for those of you who don't know. I lived there till I was 18, and then I moved to London, and then various places, including Findhorn, for sort of 18 months, 2 years, before I moved back down to London to study dance. So I studied dance when I was quite late. I started dancing up here with a local teacher, Sharon Took, when I was in past my mid-20s. I was 26 when I first started to dance, other than sort of circle dance, folk dance. So it was very late. I was starting as some people were retiring.
What was it that made the shift? I mean, what was your career path up to that point?
Oh, I didn't have a career path. I kind of bumbling through life, just doing what was interesting at the time. So my life path up till then is, I went to London. I got one grade E A level in computer science, and I rung round every polytechnic, as they were then, in London from my girlfriend's house to see if I could get in anywhere. And I'd just say, hello, I've got a grade E in computer studies. Is there anything that I can do? And eventually the Polytechnic of North East London said I could go and do computer studies with business. I think it was HN something or other, in business studies and computer studies combined. So I went to do that, and I lasted a few months. And strangely, I said I hated computers to one of the fellow students, and he said, if you hate computers, why are you doing computer studies? And I went, good point. And I left, and I never came back. Although I lied to my parents and told them I was carrying on. But anyway, so I did that, and then I discovered anarchism, actually. So that was my whole world. So anarchism and squatting and direct action, politics, anti-war movement, claimants union, Stop the City demonstrations, stuff like that. I was a political activist. That was my life. I felt I discovered something in anarchism as a sort of political philosophy and approach system. Then I really resonated with that. Then I actually got quite ill. I ended up with hepatitis and pleurisy within a very short period of time. Now looking back, thinking about what I used to eat and what I didn't eat, and everything else I used to consume, it's no wonder I ended up being ill. But that sent me on a different path. I needed to get well. I needed to find some way of getting better, and I began to look at alternative medicine and alternative healing. And apart from actually that doing me some good and getting me on a track of towards well-being, I also found that was quite a political move. It was like taking responsibility for my own health and well-being rather than always reliant on the state. I think the NHS is fantastic. But it's just, there's a place for us taking responsibility. And part of that process, I began to became curious about and interested in spirituality as opposed to religion. And with my relationships and friends and places I went, I began to hear about this place called Findhorn. This quite common story about, meandering into bookshops and then just glancing around and seeing a book about Findhorn or bumping into somebody who, meeting someone who'd been to Findhorn, I became quite curious about it. One thing led to another, end of a relationship and such like. And after one visit here to do a Findhorn Foundation Experience Week, I was quite profoundly affected by it, and I felt very intrigued and interested and had this very immediate sense that I wanted to come back and live here. To me, it was like one grand experiment, and it was like, for me, anarchism mixed together with spirituality. And I'd spent a lot of my life up until that point, when I first came here in my early 20s, very consciously disbelieving anything until it was proved to be true. And then when I came to Findhorn, I thought, well, it would be interesting if I did the opposite. And what if I just believed everything until it was proved not to be true? So Findhorn was a great place because it was like angels and fairies and devas and people who reckon they could sort of meditate and make big decisions about their life, and wonderful stories woven into the sort of history and of the Findhorn community, which is sometimes quite hard to know whether it's actually fact or myth, but it doesn't really matter because it's all very rich and inspiring anyway. So I came to Findhorn and just became a bit of a new age babe for a while. Discovered dance, which is a whole story in itself, how I ended up dancing, but that's an hour podcast on its own. I ended up going to Middlesex University because it was the only place that would let me in to study dance. And it became my life. So I graduated in 1995, having my son Jake was born while I was studying at university, which was an interesting challenge. And after 9 years practicing as a choreographer and a performer in London, we decided as a family, it's not quite a straightforward story as it sounds, but to come back to Findhorn, which had changed quite a lot since then. Since I'd lived here prior to that, the foundation had shrunk a bit. The community around the foundation had grown and developed. There was new housing projects going up. There was the building school. That's how I'm getting to see. It's one of the things that happens. I get chronologically challenged. So then I just kind of intersected two things, one from my early 20s and one from later on. The building school and things was when I first came up here, when I hitchhiked with my toolbox, because you were asking what my lifestyle was, and that's how I went on that meandering story. Just rewinding a bit then, when I was on this, I'd been ill and started to look for alternative ways of living that were a bit healthier than the smash the system anarchism, that brand of anarchism that I'd been involved in. I also did some formal training around joinery and carpentry, which is my granddad and my dad were both joiners and builders. And so I'd grown up around that, but I did a bit of formal training. And I started to work professionally as a joiner, first of all in a joiner's shop, then some self-employed work. And then when I came up here, I hitchhiked stupidly, so stupid, with two massive toolboxes. Got as far, this was from Hebden Bridge, which is where I was living at the time. I hitchhiked, I got as far as Stirling in the pouring rain. And I spent half of the only money that I had in the world on a bed and breakfast in Stirling because it was pouring down with rain. And then 25% of the money I had left I spent on a Findhorn Foundation, I think it was called Departmental Guest Week. And then I came out of that with £25 and my tools and the free lunch and the community centre here in the park. And by the end of the day, I'd got a exchange, sort of living exchange in someone's house, and then one thing led to the other, and I found a bit of a way through into the Findhorn community through swapping my skills for board and lodging, essentially. But that was way back in my early 20s. Fast forward again. I should have sort of premised this whole meeting. Now, I often say when people ask me about my history, one is that I'm chronologically challenged. So if I added up all the numbers of years that I say I did things, instead of being 60, I'd probably be 85 because. And the other thing is we have to sort of embark at the beginning of these conversations on the sort of premise that if I'll do my best to tell the truth But if I can't, or if I don't know, or I can't remember it, I'll just make up something which is remotely interesting. Sounds like it's true.
Well, I have heard about the toolbox thing from Jake before, so I've got a second witness to that.
So, what was the question, Alex? It was a while ago. Lifestyle.
I think I was asking, what was it that drew you into dance? Where were you before dance, and then how did you get into dance? And you said that it was quite late in life that you got into
very
dance.
26. Yeah,
which seems quite young to me, 26 now. But I mean,
well, yeah, because my son Jake is 30 now, and my daughter is 25. So yeah, it does seem quite young now. But as far as dance, I mean, it's different. The scene within contemporary dance and performance now, and I'm quite interested in experimental sort of dance. And I'm interested in what it means to be as a dancer, an older performer. And also because I started quite late, I was never, and also influence in there is having a child, and Jacob being quite a present parent, a very present parent, in the early years of his life had affected my dance training. So I never became a highly technical, highly proficient technical performer. It just was not available. I mean, I was going to university with young people who were 10 years younger than me, who'd been doing ballet since they were like 8. And there was no way that I was going to compete with that. So I found my own way. I found my own, I focused very much on my own interests, which was about somatic movement practice, which was back then dance improvisation. I'm less interested in that now. More experimental approaches to dance. I began to choreograph dances that I could do. It was quite a punk rock attitude towards dance. It was a bit like, if you liken it to sort of, I can play 3 chords really well, so I'm going to write a song with 3 chords. So I was thinking, well, what can I do really well that I'm totally confident about doing when I go on stage in front of other people? So the first work I began to make when I was a student at university had walking, lying down, and jumping up and down, because I could do those quite well. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, being a bit flippant there, but there's also something true about that. I'm still making dances with walking in now, but yeah, again, I keep on going off track from the question. So, I mean, what interested? I'd been doing circle dance and so some kind of folk dancing, sacred dance as it gets called up here. And one day, I mean, the really true story is I was hitchhiking through France, and it was a scorching hot, dusty day. And I was sort of kicking stones along this road, wondering whether I was ever going to get a lift, because I didn't even know where I was. And I must have been pondering what I wanted to do when I came, because I'd been here at Findhorn for a few months prior. And I was heading back here, and I thought, what might I do when I get here? And the idea just popped into my head. I know, I'm going to dance. I'm going to just do all the dance I can find. I didn't really know what kind of dance there was, but I just came back and that's what I did. And I did 5 rhythms, and I did creative movement classes. And I was, famously, I was with Sharon Took. I would pretend I was a chicken breaking out of an egg, and I got quite a lot of positive feedback for that. So I progressed to slightly bigger birds and ones that could fly, and I did a number of different things. Basically, I was encouraged to do dance, and I discovered that dance was something that you could study, which I wasn't aware of. I realized that dance was a practice, and it was something that you could really learn. And I also realized that dance was an art form, and dance became my way into experiencing, appreciating, and understanding art, because it wasn't really part of my life up until then.
Considering that you found dance in a way in Findhorn, would you say that dancing for you is also a spiritual practice, like as some people describe it? And what do you think the connection is between dance and spirituality?
Ooh, gosh, that's a big question. The relationship between dance and spirituality. I think I'm quite fascinated by the sort of physical practices that have a sort of spiritual focus, and spiritual practices that have a physical element to them. I'm quite interested. I think for me, my spirituality these days is related to my spiritual practice is learning to be present and generous and open and gliding around in the world of sort of contradictions and paradoxes. And when I'm dancing and moving, especially when I'm in a space, I'm on a room on my own, gives me access to that. I don't have anything sort of grand and wondrous to say. I can't say that I have spiritual experiences when I'm dancing. And also I'm quite interested in edges, and I quite like provocation, and I'm quite interested in where the cracks are and where the knots are, and quite interested in recontextualizing things, putting things in awkward places. And I think that's a little bit how I view the world. The world fundamentally doesn't really make very much sense to me. And dance, certainly choreography anyway, and performing, gives me an opportunity to kind of reconcile and make peace with my relationship to a world that fundamentally doesn't make sense by sharing it a little bit, of saying, well, this is how I see the world. And that you get a bit of external validation from that, and that helps me. I'm also reminded, there's this quote by this dancer and performer who's dead now, Nigel Charnock, and I once listened to him speak. He gave a presentation, and I can't remember the context of the broader conversation, but he said dance for me is not therapy, but it is therapeutic. And I think there's something about that which maybe applies to the spirituality. So I don't think necessarily dancing for me is about spirituality, but is it a spiritual thing? Yes, in the same way that relationships are, in the same way that walking through the woods and appreciating the trees, or in the same way that giving up a limiting judgment of another person. Yeah. But I like dance because in movement, because it's this me, that's my body. I could be naked and I can still do it. And I also like the transience of it, the fact that I do a movement and it's gone. That's it.
Would you say you get the same, because you kind of transition from anarchy to expressing things through dance? Would you say you get the same kind of the feeling of, is it a similar thing, the anarchy movement and dance, in a way, what you were trying to express back when you were younger? Or
Never thought about the relationship between anarchist roots and dance. I mean, I think it's there within my choreography. And also, like dance, I think it's also just important. So that dance for me, my world is dance. I'm the creative director of Dance North, and I'm involved in programming, and I'm in a privileged position of being able to go around seeing work and rising to the challenge, difficult challenge sometimes of choosing one artist's work over another to present here, or who to be in residence. So I can bring my skills and my sensibility and sometimes my aesthetic interests to that. And then there's the act of dancing and moving, which could just be my experience of moving, which could be just to feel good, or it could be a choreographic process, or it could be some combination of them. And then there's also making work for performance, where I have to think about, I'm now making a piece with a collaborator or not, where I'm having to make certain sort of structural, aesthetic, and other choices about what might be interesting, while staying true and having to my artistic vision and the ideas, and having some integrity. So there's lots of different outlets and expressions, is that the right word, but different outlets for the dance, and they don't always necessarily meet for me. I've often been quite envious of people who somehow have a sort of free flow. Like dancing is just, they dance as an expressive activity, which then goes into their teaching, which then flows naturally into what they do on stage, which then goes into who they are in the street. I feel a little bit more disjointed around it. But as far as the kind of links to anarchism, and maybe dance, the world of dance in all of those different and more expressions and configurations, maybe it gives me some of the same freedoms that I experienced when I was younger, when I discovered anarchism. It certainly gives me a room to make things up, and I often say this within Dance North. Sometimes when things get really difficult and we're getting really stuck and we're feeling under pressure or maybe under threat, I often say, let's just remember that we're making this shit up. We're just making it up as we go along. You know, I'm not a business person. I don't work with business people. We've somehow managed with Liz, particularly who's been working with me for 15 years or so in the organisation. We're just making it up. And I think that this is interesting now because I'm sort of on that edge of thinking, discovering something myself with your question. If I'm rolling around my living room in the morning, or whether I'm dancing within a studio with other dancers, or whether I'm making choreography, or actually whether I'm curating a festival, I think I do have that thread that goes back to that time, that within anarchism, which is maybe my personality, which is I've managed to create a very wonderful and quite privileged life that allows me just to make shit up as I go along. And I suppose part of the privilege is that other people seem to quite like it. So it allows me to keep going. There's something there, there's a kind of something developing theory there.
And with your son finding his own way in his life, is there any kind of particular message you kind of give young people who are thinking, what do I want to do? Or do you just say, make shit up?
No, you'd have to ask him. I mean, Jake and I are quite, both Jake and I and Kezia and I are similar and different in very different ways. I think Jake's a lot more focused than I was, and has a clear idea of what it is he wants to do. But I don't know. I mean, I think what comes to mind, which is probably is from the other side, rather than having any kind of great worldly advice to young people, apart from really follow what makes you feel alive. That's something that's really important. There's this quote, and I can never remember who it's by, and I always make it up because I said before, I just make stuff up if I can't remember it. But it's something along the lines of, don't ask so much about what the world needs, but go out and do what makes you feel truly happy or something, because what the world needs is for people to go and be truly happy. Now, I don't mean we just go la la la, happy clappy, let's forget all the troubles in the world and skip along and sing. But it's about, let's do what we really feel passionate about. And I think pleasure and happiness and good feelings is quite subversive in its own way. So I would say to young people, go out and do whatever version of it. People like to say what makes your heart sing, or follow your passion, or just do what excites you, do what inspires you. Hang out with people that feel good to hang out with. But then mixed in with that, which is to do with my own experience, is what I often say to someone else teaching, which I don't do anymore, is because of the impact it had on me. Always remember to thank and appreciate the people that have made a difference to you. Because there was somebody really important in my life who told me to go and dance, and to immerse myself in that world, which I didn't even know existed. And if he hadn't said that, I would have never have done it. And the other thing is just be really grateful. Just be extremely grateful and appreciative for what we've got and to each other. And yeah, so that's the kind of advice really is. Be grateful, appreciate the people that have made a difference,
Who was that told you to go and dance?
It was a man called Eric Ray Evans, who was one of the leaders of the Actors Institute, the Mastery from the Actors Institute. And the Mastery was I don't know if it's still going up here, but it's there was every year they used to put on a workshop here at Findhorn in the Universal Hall called the Mastery, which was a kind of it was a workshop which was developed for actors and performers originally, and then was broadened to be a general sort of self-empowerment, confidence building, and you would perform a little piece, 2-minute piece during the weekend, quite intensive workshop with the Mastery in front of fellow participants, and then the Mastery leaders, I think they called them leaders back then, would work with you on it and would get you to sort of to kind of step up and become more confident or maybe more expressive and different things like that. And I did a little dance. I was doing classes with Sharon back then and other creative movement classes, but I made a 2-minute dance, which was made of pseudo martial arts moves because I used to do karate. And the thing that always makes me cringe is I also did a chant. It's a kind of singing chant in it, which I always feel slightly embarrassed by. But anyway, I did this 2-minute dance piece. And at the end then they worked with me and said lots of positive things. And in the party afterwards, Eric came up to me and said, "So where did you train?" And I said, "Well, I got my City and Guilds in Carpentry and Joinery at the Bradford Skills Centre," which is what I genuinely thought he meant. And he went, "No, not joinery, dance." And I went, "What?" And he went, "Dance, where did you train?" I went, I don't think I could say anything because I didn't even know it was a thing to even say I haven't. And he thought it was hilarious. And then he started sort of talking about his sheroes, as he called them, people who had... He would say things like Martha Graham and Isadora Duncan. I would just look at him completely blank. And he thought it was so hilarious. He called over the other leader and they had a little laugh at my expense. Anyway, he said, "Look, believe me, you need to go away and immerse yourself in the world of dance." And I didn't really understand it. And he would say, "You have to go out there and do it." And I said, "Well, I'm old, what my age and all this?" He said, "Just go and find stuff to do." So I said, okay. Anyway, a year late, I hadn't done anything apart from carrying on doing the classes with Sharon and 5 Rhythms and Correct Movement stuff. And a year later, he came back for the second workshop, which is called Creativity and Leadership, I believe. And it was him facilitating. And I walked into the room and he just came up to me and he said, "What are you still doing here?" And it was at that moment that something just went ka-chunk in me. And I thought, oh, this is serious. So I did the workshop. I picked up, back then, you'd have to use directory inquiries. And I remember picking up, I lived in a caravan just not far from here. I picked up the phone and rang up 192 on directory inquiries. And I said, "Can you give me the phone number of the Laban Centre? I think it's in Manchester." And the woman on the other side said, "I've got one in London." And I said, "That'll do." So I rung up the Laban Centre and they gave me a place on their 1-year course without an audition because they said I lived in Scotland. I was an overseas student, which was hilarious. But anyway, I didn't go there. I went to Middlesex University. But then with Eric, what happened is, this is why I think it's really important to be truly, really thankful. So many, many years later, I'd trained, I'd got my degree, I'd started making work professionally, I'd had residencies, I was getting money to make work, small scale, but I was working. And I was at a show on the South Bank Centre in London. It was DV8, I remember. And there was this man way across the other side of the room, and he was laughing, and he was very sort of charismatic. And I kept looking at him thinking, I know this man. And I began to sort of walk towards him, trying to think, who is this person? And as I got closer, I suddenly realised it was Eric. His full name was Eric Ray Evans. And he was an actor. And the last time I'd heard, he'd gone to LA for his work. Anyway, I went over to him and I said, "Eric, you might not remember me, Karl, Findhorn, did the dance. You told me to go and study. I did it. It's 9-10 years ago. It's changed my life. I just want to say thank you so much for the gift. And he started crying, and I started crying, and we were holding each other and hugging each other. And he just said to me, "You don't know how much that means to me." And we hugged and cried a bit more, and then we parted ways. And then I found out that 3 months later he was dead. He died of cancer, and he'd come back from LA because he knew that he was dying. So at the moment that I'd shared my appreciation and thanks for him was at a time when he knew that he was dying. And I think that was when I found out later that had happened. It was just, that was that thing for me, is that you must always make it a business to go and thank and appreciate people who've made a difference in your life.
That encouragement that he gave you to get into dance, now that's what you're doing for a living. You're encouraging other people to get into dance.
Yeah.
One of the things that dancing offers, just before we sort of wrap up, is embodiment. So embodiment's often, I guess, listed as like something that's subversive against maybe like the mainstream paradigm of things, in a world where we tend to get very like wrapped up in our own heads, especially like with the digital age and everything like that. And being in Findhorn and running a dance company, is there anything about your dancing that you think relates to the climate crisis or like our environmental situation?
That directly relates to it.
Just in terms of like your inspiration?
Not directly and specifically in terms of a response. I mean, as far as my own work, and as I said before, they're all kind of separate, but I suppose they all converge in me. As far as my own work, I don't tend to make work that's kind of issue-based, which some people do, and they can make very good work that's specifically issue-based. And I think people who can make work that cause me to think about issues, even when I like to think I'm quite aware and proactively thinking about things, I think is very positive. But I certainly don't make work that's issue-based. However, I like to think or hope that I'm considering issues, whether it's to do with climate change or any other major issue that's facing us. I suppose this sort of climate change has this sort of existential threat. Sometimes actually even world war seems to be kind of looming again as another existential threat. As far as Dance North, are continually and proactively kind of maintain and keep alive a kind of understanding and appreciation of issues and concerns of whether they're personal, interpersonal, or global. So whether it's issues of climate change, we reflect on that all the time, and we actually have to for our funders. We know there's a sort of statutory requirement from our funding bodies that we reduce our carbon impact, that we address issues of inclusivity, diversity, equality. So we proactively engaging in issues around whatever is important, whether it's to do with race and ethnicity, whether it's to do with gender, whether it's to do with sexuality. We're quite a political, in some way, organisation, in some way that we operate with, I hope, within a sort of matrix of political awareness of the intersections of different issues. So class. One of the things that we're talking about a lot at the moment is privilege. I think it's something particularly here in the Findhorn Eco Village, is that we need to wake up people to the role that privilege plays in our lives, whether it goes back to what we referred to around Sonia's work and how it might sort of trigger some conversations around who gets to live here, power and money. So I know you talked about climate change, but I think we just we do our best to weave together the various issues that are facing us as humanity and the planet, recognizing that some of them are existential threats, like climate change. God forbid if it gets to a point where kind of nuclear war becomes another, we'd have to live. I've lived through that as well, when it was felt like a very real threat, or whether it's more individual or to do with cultures, or to do with groups of people, whether it's to do with identity. They're all important. They all intersect, and it's a rich and very fertile ground too. It's not all about kind of unpleasantness. I think it's really good to rise to those challenges. And I hope that, and I think that we do a fairly good job within Dance North, and I'm not sure how I do it individually, but to rise positively to some of the challenges that vast array of issues brings. Otherwise, we just sink into despair
And
and never come out.
dancing is one of the best ways to rise. Someone once said that a day without dancing's a day wasted. Just to segue into Dance North, it's a very special year this year for Dance North because it's the 20th anniversary. Can you describe to anyone who doesn't know the kind of things that Dance North has done and currently does?
Well, yeah, it's our 20th anniversary. I mean, Dance North was going a little bit longer than the 20 years. It's a bit like when people have been in a relationship and then they get married and they say how long you've been married, but it's been together slightly longer. Deborah Lewin and myself founded Body Surf Scotland, really as in its sort of activity and events. I think it was in 2000 or 2001. We formalised as an organisation as Body Surf Scotland in 2003, which was essentially we had to form a company to be able to access funding for a large-scale international teachers event gathering here at Findhorn and a tour of some work. So that was how sort of Body Surf Scotland began. We actually began, I used to practice and teach a dance form called contact improvisation. And Deborah back then was teaching the 5 rhythms. And with body surfing is a kind of move technique, if you like, within contact improvisation. And within the 5 rhythms, they talked about the wave. So sort of Body Surf Scotland name emerged out of that. And then a few years ago, when we, as the organisation had grown and developed, and we were applying for Creative Scotland regular funding, which is core funding from Creative Scotland, our Arts Council. And at that point, we felt like we needed a name that better reflected or indicated what we actually did, and to eliminate the number of surfers around the world who are following us on Facebook and Instagram. So Dance North, previous Body Surf Scotland, I think one of the important things is to say that it was founded, for me, the sort of founding principles was very much, I'd been living and working in London as a dancer and as a choreographer, and moved back to Findhorn because this is where I started dancing actually, at Findhorn, and where I met Deborah. And when I came back, I very much wanted to create a sustainable, interesting life in the broadest sense. And it felt like as an artist, the only way that I was going to have an interesting, sustainable life as a dance artist and interested in contemporary dance and choreography was by attracting lots of interesting, cool people to come to where I was living. So I began to put on workshops and events and performances that attracted the kind of people that I wanted to hang out with. So it's very selfishly motivated. And luckily, other people responded to that and wanted to come and liked to come. We used to put on, if we could get a little bit of money for workshops, we would attract teachers that I'd been interested in working with prior to that, when I was in London and around Europe. to teach a workshop, and then I'd ask them to perform on the back of that, or sometimes we would get some money for a performance and would ask them to do a workshop on the back of that. And way back then, it was very much an expensive hobby. It was, a lot of hard work and a lot of commitment from those people that were involved. And there's been quite a few people that have been involved in the organisation that are no longer, that have moved on, who are extremely grateful for the sort of early stages. And now, as an organisation, we have, I was going to say 7 employees. 7, working between 2 and full time, and delivering a whole quite broad program of activities and events. So we have Rise Festival, which is a sort of signatory performance event, which is coming up at the end of this month, end of May, which we can talk about in a bit more detail in a minute. We have a program of participatory activity, which is dance classes and movement classes for children, for young people. We work in partnership with the local authority, delivering kind of movement, exercise, engagement with older people, some older vulnerable people. We've put on a program of dance and movement activity for children with support needs. We have activity we support professional artists through residency program and different bespoke packages of support. And we're also very involved in what we call sector development within the arts sector, within the dance sector, within Scotland and within Europe. We're very involved in conversations and activities around developing that. And what's really important for us as a whole, as an organisation, is a sense of integration, that there isn't, often within dance organisations, the participatory programme sits very separate from the artistic programme. And for us, it's really important that we find ways of integrating that. So whether it's artists delivering some of the classes, whether it's with our youth dance company, and we had a really successful project that's run over the last couple of years, Savage, which was a performance project which took place here around Findhorn Eco Village in the dunes and the woodland. So that was working with a very committed bunch of young people within a dance company who, while they weren't formally trained, have made work that sits very well within a professional context. So it gives us some indication that it's important for us that there's a sense of integration and relationship between all the different parts.
Is there something about... Sorry. Is there something about this place and the culture of this community that's informed the way in which you've created and structured the business, the organisation, and the way you've run the workshops and that sort of thing? Or
yes, I mean, definitely. It's I've had Dance North's relationship with. I mean, we have an office we're based here in the Park Eco Village, and we use the Universal Hall as one of our primary venues. We also use outdoor venues, both here in the immediate locality, but also further afield, whether it's in Elgin or Milltown Airfield. We had a big piece which is about 25 minutes drive from here. Different activity in different places, but there's something about the fact that we're based here, even though not all the staff members would consider themselves members of the Eco Village community or the Findhorn Foundation community. There's something about the environment here. And I think that it's a mix. I mean, I've never consciously pushed where we are or who we are as a community, or the relationship to the Findhorn Foundation or its sort of spiritual roots. One of the things I often say to art when I'm having conversations with artists who have got an interest in coming to perform at Rise, or teachers who want to come here and present work, is I was to say that they have to want to come here for more reason than just another gig on the tour. There has to be something here that's of interest or draws them, but that thing can be quite varied and broad. It could be, as many people have heard of the Findhorn Foundation or the Park Eco Village and want to come here and find out more about it. It might be that they're interested in eco-village design or permaculture, or it might be just that they've really wanted to come to Scotland and love the idea of being able to walk on the beach in between rehearsals or after a show, or the fact that they're in close proximity to Cairngorm Mountains. Well, I've got an artist who's coming to Rise, Cindy Runard, I've just got an email this morning which said, can you please give us some recommendations on where to stay? Because after Rise, we want to go and visit Loch Ness. So there's an interest there. So much of touring within dance and theatre is parachuting into a city, staying in a hotel, doing the gig, and then leaving the next day, not actually ever seeing anything or experiencing any of the local culture. So that's one of the ways in which it influences. And I think the environment is a very attractive place to come for people, whether it's visiting audiences or artists. It's a very pleasant place to hang out and be in a festival.
It also seems reflected in the programme itself this year, because I see there's one performance that's about, is it mycelial networks, or at least...
Yes.
And then there's some workshops about embodiment as well.
Yes. I mean, there's within the Rise programme. I mean, do you want me to talk a bit more about the programme?
Yeah, so it's 26th of May that it starts, just over a week away.
Yes, it's the last weekend of May, 26, 27, 28. So we've got a range of different work, and the work that you were just picking up on that has a reference to mycelium mushrooms and growing is it's an aspect of a work in development by a movement and walking artist, Simone Kenyon, who actually lives here. Now, she made the move with her family up from Edinburgh, catalysed by the fact that she was offered a long-term residency with Dance North, which, as I said before, is one of our things that we do, is offer opportunities and some of the resources for artists to work on their practice or on making work. So part of what Simone's exploring, investigating, is, as my understanding, it's a kind of the relationship, sort of human fungal relationship. She's quite interested in exploring a sort of relationship through sound, and the event that she's putting on has a sort of like kind of meditative quality, if you like, tuning into the mushroom. It sounds pretty way out and wacky, but actually Simone is a very down to earth, very grounded, and quite an extraordinary artist. So Simone is one of two artists that we've actually who are in residence with us at the moment through what's called the AIM residency programme, which is funded by something called Culture Collective, which is through Creative Scotland. There's Simone, and then there's Salma, who is an artist who's based in Glasgow, who's also doing a little work in development, sharing around her piece, which is called the Silence Project. That's bringing together different interests of hers, but one of them is through the residency, she reconnected and started to relearn British Sign Language, and she integrates that into her performance. It sounds quite interesting because she's, as well as doing her arts practice and developing this new piece of work, she's also been teaching a series of free Afro aerobics classes called Aerobics with Soul, which is something that she teaches. It's kind of blend of sort of Tanzanian African dance, which is her roots, with a little bit of kind of a good old 80s aerobics. So they're quite contrasting in some ways, because her performance work and her teaching work is quite different, but it has this generosity of spirit that I would say is one of Salma's sort of signatory traits. So there's a couple of pieces there from artists in residence. Should I just continue? Should I just give a big...
Well, another one I've seen that really caught my eye was as I Am from Reykjavik. It seems like really like pertinent right now, in a time when, you know, we'll have like a lot more like environmental like migration and refugees in the future, and it's a big question in the UK as well, like, or in Europe in general, the movement of people.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Sonia's piece, Sonia Hughes, I'm from Reykjavik, is a kind of really interesting piece. It's not dance as such. I would say it's choreographic in its own way. I was reading a post the other day from Sonia on social media that she was exclaiming surprise that the show had been booked to 3 dance festivals now, which is kind of interesting. So this is a durational piece, the location of which will depend on a few things when she arrives and has a look, and the weather. But it's the piece in itself is about Sonia arrives with a sort of flat-packed structure and builds herself a little house, essentially where she wants, with this sort of, the idea, the exploration of if she builds a home for herself in the Findhorn Peninsula, on the Findhorn Peninsula. So how might that be? How might it be for her, but how might it be for other people? And it's got a lot of references to to do with immigration, to do with race, to do with Sonia as a Black woman. There's an associated package, I guess, or thread of activity that weaves in and out of the actual performance installation. So during the time that Sonia is here, she invites people to come and meet her. People who she says is that are a little bit like her in some ways. So she puts them out as a kind of questions of like, I'm looking for somebody who in some ways is a little bit like her while she's in Findhorn. So they're all things to do with that she's interested in. So she's a wild swimmer. She likes to cook for friends. She'd like to meet someone who was working class, but now identifies as middle class. As a Black woman, Sonia identifies as being fat, so she talks about wanting to meet a fat woman here in Findhorn. She says Findhorn, but actually it could be anywhere in the locality in Moray. So this is this interesting idea again of sense of belonging, of meeting, of welcoming. It's quite provocative. I think it's quite provocative as in terms of migration, as you're saying, in terms of the broader and more visible or audible conversations around race, which I think are really crucial and important. I think it also has a lot of resonance here with it in not just the park eco-village, but within this area around housing and homes and about who can be here and who can't be here and who's welcome and who's not welcome and who can just rock up and build a house and who can't. The attitudes and the attitudes of those of us who are already living here. So I think it asks some quietly, but quite potent questions. And it's also really interesting just to stand and watch as well. I think it's... So that's Sonia's piece. And there's also a series of photographs. So her son Solomon is here and he'll be taking photographs and they'll be being posted in the evening of the performance.
There was another piece that stood out to me. So another one that stood out to me in the description. So I think this is like a sort of audio hybrid dance piece. But in the description, it said that there's something more intimate about sending a voice message than sending nudes. And I found something eerily true in that. I don't know. I mean, when I first started receiving voice messages from friends, I really struggled to record a voice message back. And then I would like keep on repeating it over and over again to try and get it right. I struggled to like sort of let go into that intimacy at first. It took some getting used to, but now I really enjoy voice messages.
Yeah. And Sindri Runad's piece, it's kind of fascinating. It's also very quite humorous. It's a piece I saw as an extract of when I was in Montreal. It's from Sweden. I went to Montreal to look at bringing work over from Quebec, and I came back with a piece from Sweden. It's quite an interesting piece. I think it's very relatable for anyone who is, as you say, how it engages in that world of sort of the audio, the voice messages, the text messages, the sort of personal messaging, whether it seems images or not. I was just reading the brochure today again ahead of this, and I was thinking, being reminded of could leaving an audio message be more intimate than sending a nude picture? And there is something intimate, I think, about the voice messaging, and I do, as you've done. I've been guilty of leaving voice messages and then listening to them back and then deleting them, and then leaving another one, and then forgetting what I'd actually whether I'd said everything in the most recent message that I thought I'd said, or was I just thinking it was in one I'd deleted. But that's that's a bit of a side. I think it's really interesting. I think it's interesting in relation to who Sindri is and their lived experience in the world. I think I'm not going to give away too much around that because it's definitely part of the piece and the work. I think it's just a kind of wonderful, interesting, at times irreverent, at times quite profound, relatable, fun. It's not often that I want to join in. Well, there is a little bit of audience participation in this one, but it's more to do with the sensory experience.
And then there was one that stood out. Well, it looks like a good show as well, but the title really flashed in my eyes. You probably know what one I'm going to say. The one called Tits and Teeth.
Tits and Teeth.
Can you tell us a bit about Tits and Teeth?
Tits and Teeth by Thick and Tight. I mean, what's more, you don't really need to say anything else, really. Thick and Tight is the name of the company, Eleanor and Daniel. So Thick and Tight is the name they've given to a series of 4 pieces. And they have many, many more. We had a choice of which ones to bring, although we're a bit limited on which of their performers are available. It's it's 4 pieces out of quite a large suite of reenactments, the sort of poetic license of famous and infamous personalities, this sort of queer, subversive take on them. There's an absolutely hilarious drag duet involving lip syncing to an interview by Barbara Cartland, which is just hysterical. Grace Jones appears, and then we have a kind of interesting, wonderful juxtaposition mix match of John Cage and Elaine Page. So John Cage is a sort of 20th century experimental music composer, and then Elaine Page, a sort of musical theatre star from when she was born in 1950 or something, or 48. So it's a kind of interesting, humorous sort of smashing together of 2 very different musical personalities. It's a kind of subversive, very precise, highly technical, camp in places, entertaining, satirical dance theatre, I think. We've deliberately put them on the first evening with the idea that people come along to that and enjoy themselves, then they're more likely to come back to the rest of the festival.
And am I right in saying that people can book for single events for a whole day pass or a 3-day pass on the website?
Yeah, what we're encouraging is for people to book for I think it's for £45 for the festival pass. You get to come to everything. We ask for an additional small amount if you've got a festival pass to come to the workshops or the talks. But basically, the festival pass gives you access to all the performances, the screen dance program, which has been curated by Gail Snedden, who used to work with us and ran the youth dance program together with some of the youth dance company. The birthday party on Friday night, the if you like, backstage quieter chill out party on Saturday, and the picnic on Sunday. So you get to just come to everything. And for that price, we've deliberately designed it that there isn't necessarily a financial pressure to come to everything. You can still pick and choose, or you can get a day ticket. So those are the 2 choices.
The festival seems to be growing every year. and Dance North itself is looking really healthy. I have a friend that's coming up from London for the festival next week. Are you finding that people are travelling far and wide for this every year?
It varies, but there's certainly been. I'm not completely up to speed on ticket sales, but I did ask before the weekend about visitors, and there certainly seems to be quite a few people from within the dance sector who are coming up, which is wonderful because it gives us an opportunity to, they're a valid audience too, or we're a valid audience, but to find that there's a real hunger and need for opportunities to gather, to collect, to see work, to hang out, to discuss work, to discuss where people are at in the world post-COVID. So there seems to be quite an interest from people visiting. Through the COVID era, we had quite a few outdoor performances, and we managed to place things also in between the lockdowns. And we built quite a healthy, or a very healthy, local audience. So we certainly hope and anticipate that there'll be a large number of local audience. That's both within the Eco Village sort of Findhorn Foundation community, but also significantly further afield across Moray and into the Highlands. It's a really varied program. I mean, we touched on some of the pieces here, and if people just go to the website, look at dancenorth.scot, all of the work is on there. There's some artists that we've worked with a lot in the past, Kirsty Simpson, a new artist, Selene Veinactor, who's got a quite very funny and moving piece, which I guess is about rehearsing her own funeral, which is interesting for someone who's in their 30s. Mm-hmm. There's dance classes and dance and movement class for families, for children and their parents and carers. There's lots of different activities. So I think the variety of work that's on offer, plus the context of the 20th birthday celebrations, the fact that we'll have cake, and that on the Friday night there'll be a party with DJs, then it provides this a real rich and quite bijou, in a way, festival experience, which I think is appealing for locals who want to dip in and out, or for people further afield who want to come and just stay here for the weekend and have a wonderful time with dips in the sea in between, if you're so inclined.
Is there any final messages that you want to give for our listeners?
Yeah, come along to Rise last weekend of May. If you want to know any more, come along to Dance North office. If you're local, give us a call, send an email, go on social media. We love to hear from people. We have a very personable approach and happy to chat with anybody. And thanks very much. It's been good. I hope my sort of ill health coughing hasn't punctuated the podcast too much.
It's all been good. Thanks, Karl. Thanks for talking to us.
Brilliant. Thank you.
This has been our Findhorn Barrow, episode 7.